Taro is the new horror movie released by Sony Pictures. It's based on a horror novel called Horoscopes and follows seven friends who rent a house in the Catskills to celebrate a birthday where they discover a box of tarot cards and decide to read each other's horoscopes. However, soon after they realize they've unleashed something far more dangerous and sinister than they bargained for. Now, Taro, to be fair, was a moderately successful movie, and by successful, I mean while it didn't do so well critically, and the reviews were pretty bad, it still made a decent chunk of change. The movie cost $8 million to make, and it ended up making $20 million, which really isn't bad at all. They made their money back and still doubled their profit. It's a movie that wasn't seen by tons of people. It didn't dominate the box office, releasing right alongside The Fall Guy, which surprisingly cost 17 times the budget and still didn't make its money back. And let's face it, it was marketed way more, yet Taro turned out to be the more successful movie. But still, Taro is just a really bad movie. It may have strategically worked so it would make cash and not cost too much, which is very evident in the final product, but it still is just objectively bad, and from its plot to its characterization to its overall production values and how it operates as a horror film is just not good. So today, let's break down and let's talk about where Taro falters, what it does to bring itself down, and how it could be better. So one of the key problems here with this film is everything just feels kind of unmotivated and not driven by any logical story development. For example, the inciting incident of these characters going to stay at a house in the Catskills works kind of well, but it's very basic. Like on paper, bringing these characters together to have this plot unfold should work, but there isn't anything more than what's presented. These characters don't have any prior backstory. We don't know what drives these characters to hang out. Besides, they're just friends. We don't get that chemistry. And that's just what the movie tells us. We're told that two of the main characters, Haley and Grant, used to date, but are now broken up. And that's really the only form of tension, which really isn't enough. Like, we don't know anything about these characters, or what they do in their spare time, or how they really feel. They might as well just be characters in a video game cutscene or commercial, because their backstories don't really matter and aren't present. We don't know who they are or what drives them. When you're watching a movie, it's just not as interesting when you have no idea who these characters are. They don't have any real distinct personality traits. They're just there to read dialogue that serves the plot and it just doesn't feel believable. There aren't many moments where these characters have a quirkiness to them or a distinct trait that makes them stand out. And the plot as it is very thin, and it's a very short movie. But still, there aren't really many scenes that inform us of who these characters are. I think a good example to show how a horror movie can develop its characters even for a brief moment is The Cabin in the Woods. The movie does this really well. We have a brief introductory scene in the film where we meet all the characters and their distinctive traits are put on screen, and it's only in a couple minutes, but we get a feeling of who these guys are, and it makes such a difference. In Cabin in the Woods, we see that the main character in her very first scene is having an affair with her college professor and is afraid to talk to the group about this. It informs you right away of who this character is, how she's a bit shy, how she's nervous approaching this relationship. You already get so much information just from one small moment. We get Chris Hemsworth and Anna Hutchinson's characters, who are both the extroverted jock and his girlfriend. You get Marty the stoner, who gets plenty of interesting moments, such as pulling up with a bong he's disguised as a coffee cup, and then he's immediately paranoid that the house they're staying in is bugged. Then there's Holden, Chris Hemsworth's football teammate, who's pretty nerdy, unlike Chris Hemsworth and his girlfriend, and there's just this contrast right there that informs you right away of who these characters are. My point is, Cabin in the Woods offers these little dynamics and small moments, as well as dialogue, that supports these character arcs and makes information about them known right away. With Taro's characters, I wasn't really sure their dynamics at all because the characters are so flat and all their actions are dictated by dialogue that's just plowing the story ahead. I honestly didn't really feel like I understood any of these characters or could relate to them at all, except for Jacob Batalon's character, and maybe that's just because I know him from Spider-Man, and here he plays the goofy, stoner-type character who just seems more distinct than everyone else. He's more of a joker, he's the fool, and because of this he stands out, but there isn't really anything on top of that. I would say all the other characters are just kind of boring, and he just has this slightly more interesting personality. But that's it. It's the only thing that kept me interested in his character. The movie just needed to give its characters more weight, and more scenes that will make you care for them later on. There aren't small moments where we really could see these characters in a more personalized setting, and therefore we don't understand them as well. Like the setup with this film and Cabin in the Woods is very similar, and the types of characters are almost carbon copies. But these characters are just empty. They don't have these fun moments. There aren't any interesting situations, like in Cabin in the Woods, where a couple tries to sneak off to the woods to have sex, or the group confronting a creepy gas station owner, or the group trying to navigate the power going out in the house, or the stoner guy trying to touch all the stuffed animals on the wall. Like, in this movie, they just discover the tarot cards because they're in the basement. In Cabin in the Woods, there's actually a power outage, which leads to them going down there and finding them. Everything happens for a reason, but in this, there's no distinct traits, no distinct reason. If you want to build really good characters too, you need to establish these quirks and show them off. You don't just mention through this character drawing cards that, oh, this character's the fool because he's goofy, this character's the high priestess because she's vain. No, you actually need to establish that prior, like Cabin in the Woods does, instead of just telling us, or else it won't work as well. And it shouldn't just be some surface level dialogue. There should be little moments that inform you of these characters and come back later in the film, which could feel rewarding if you plant these little seeds early on, like Cabin in the Woods does. You get to show who these characters are in the first scene, then set them up and pay them off later. If you do that, your audience will feel more rewarded, as opposed to just telling us these characters represent the certain horror movie stereotypes, and then killing them off based on where you plant the seeds. If you don't do this, it will just feel empty and hollow. Another key failure to Teru is the movie just feels incredibly rushed, and we go from really important moments very quickly without feeling like there's any proper or logical story development, which makes the film feel really cheesy and bad. Take, for example, when the first death occurs, and as ridiculous as it might seem, because the characters read these tarot cards and then get killed in a way that the cards predicted, it honestly would make for a more interesting story if the characters try to go to the police and try to reason with them, and maybe there's a bit of comedy with the police or laughing and joking at them, but for some reason, in order to make the film's runtime a bit tighter, I guess, they just kind of skip over this. There is one scene where the characters go to the cops who tell them they should stay home. The police will take care of things. That's it. It just doesn't feel realistic. It doesn't feel like a world that's properly developed. And yeah, in reality, maybe the police aren't going to want to let a bunch of kids take the investigation on by themselves, but it's just a fact the movie rushes through this part of the story that makes it feel so fake and surface level. Like, you don't even need to have the cops making fun of the kids. You can just have one police or cop character, perhaps, who's insistent on letting the police handle things and tells the kids to stay away from this investigation. And then maybe later, that character is killed, and it would leave more of an impact. I guess it's just about world building, because in this world of the film, everything feels very small. There's only the 7 characters who are being picked off one by one, and it doesn't feel like there's anything else happening outside of that. It's like we're trapped in this little bubble, which feels very small, and therefore it doesn't feel very realistic at all. You need to make this world believable. You need to fill it with side characters or just any character altogether that feels like they could exist in real life, because the movie feels so artificial, the characters getting picked off, and then the group meets again and discuss how crazy this all is, just like what the tarot cards predicted. But nothing comes of that. They meet the police, but nothing comes of that. Once you tell them they'll handle the investigation, we don't get any small scenes with the mourning parents or their grieving friends. They just kind of talk about it for a bit and say, oh, this is crazy, and they go back to their lives and they start getting killed again. It just doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like something that could happen in real life. There's no sense of death or dread. The death just doesn't feel real. There's no density or realism. And a good horror movie will have that. Good horror movies have dread, where you feel like this could actually happen to you. And yeah, people might just want a simple and kind of cheesy horror movie to enjoy, and it's why this movie made money, but if you want to make a good movie, you need these little scenes of depth. You need these scenes where the characters really interact, where they really feel like they're in danger and they could die, where there's actually a sense of terrible dread looming, or else you don't have a good horror film at all. The movie also feels artificial because of how it's structured and paced. Like I said, there's no build-up, no sense of dread. Characters are just picked off, and that's it. The movie doesn't get progressively darker, which would help it a lot, and it feels cheesy because it isn't until halfway through this 90-minute film they introduce this random old psychic lady character who tells the characters what's happening. She tells them the tarot cards are cursed, and that's why their friends are dying. But it just comes out of nowhere. There's no build-up to this, no planting the seeds earlier. This old psychic lady is just someone they seek out because they're curious, they want to know what's happening. And then she proceeds to deliver a 3-minute monologue of exposition explaining how some lady was killed years ago after being accused of being a witch, and now for some reason is haunting the cards. You know, this could work, it's just this information comes out of nowhere, and therefore it doesn't feel like it matters at all. We're just told this information about 50 minutes into the film, and we have to roll with it. There's no proper setup, no prior hint at what's coming. If you want to make your film successful and leave an impact, you need to implement these elements way earlier. So the film will feel like it has meaning, and the moments that are important to understanding the plot will have value, because your audience deserves to know what's going on, and shouldn't just feel like crucial plot points are crowbarred in. If you establish important elements from the beginning and build them up gracefully and leave a breadcrumb trail to lead to your big reveal, the reveal will feel earned and not forced or cheesy. Set up an establishing idea or some hook or cold open to lure your audience in, and build the foundation of your story from there. Maybe the film had introduced this old psychic lady earlier as a resident of the house, and show her being haunted by visions, feature her just in a brief few scenes, it would indicate this woman holds some important information. She doesn't even have to be a big character, just let people know there is this psychic character there. And then when the time comes around and many characters are dead, have the remaining characters turn to her and have her reveal herself and the origin for why these cards are cursed. In any film, you need to set up information and pay it off, because if you don't do this, you're only going to make what could be very scary or impactful feel lackluster. Another key issue with this movie is it just feels very cheap, very ugly, and very rushed. Like, this could almost be a student film, which I feel is an insult to pretty good student films. A few videos back, I mentioned Abigail, which is also a film in the horror genre, which had a slight issue with pacing and tonal consistency, but it still managed to win me over with a strong production design and aesthetic, and even the cast chemistry had this strength this movie does not have. I mean, this film really made Abigail seem like the Godfather, and to be fair, Abigail was not a bad film at all. It just had several factors which worked against being in the horror genre. See, that film, while struggling to be really scary, still had great characters who all felt fleshed out, like they had a purpose for the story. Even if they represented the most basic tropes, as I mentioned Cabin in the Woods had, the actors utilized those characters, and the writing was strong enough to make those characters memorable and worth investing in. Abigail may not have been straight up scary, but it was funny, it was entertaining in spades, and had a fully realized aesthetic and gothic design, as well as set pieces that informed the story and made it more enjoyable to watch. Tarot does not have that. It feels like a hollow space that exists in a vacuum. It feels like nothing really mattered in the movie, and honestly, I can't even remember any of the characters' names. I had to go back to the Wikipedia page for this movie to find out what the characters' names are, even though they don't have any depth. None of the characters have any reason to make me care for them, or a backstory that makes them worth investing in. Whereas Abigail has all of that, and it really shows you that when you're writing a film, you need to make characters that are intriguing, that have interesting backstories, or have some small quirks that make them worth watching. When I say it's like Tarot exists in a vacuum, it's because there's no design here. That's nothing really memorable about watching this film. There's nothing in this film that you can't experience anywhere else. Good movies have really original set pieces, settings that are memorable, and especially horror films, locations that are scary or leave an impact. When you go to watch a movie, you want to experience something that you can't experience anywhere else. This movie's locations should feel like that. Characters themselves too, but the locations here are so bland, forgettable, and a lot of this is even supposed to take place on a college campus, but we don't see any student life or any activity aside from these main characters just hanging out in a room. It just feels artificial. You just have some select random locations, like an empty hallway with an elevator, some random creepy basement or bridge where these characters get trapped in their car and have to make a run for it. To be fair, I do think the bridge sequence in this film, while somewhat unnerving, and while most of the movie is kind of bland, this one scene utilizes an element of suspense where the car's motion detector is going off all around and suggests there's some evil presence all around the car. I will give the film that. The sequence is creepy, and it's a moment of suspense that you don't really find in any other film, and using this car's location sensor is a cool modern way to establish this. It's cool, it's something you can't really get in any other film, but it just isn't enough, and it's only one scene where the rest of the film is so bad. The movie just doesn't have many memorable set pieces, and the kill scenes, which are kind of the crucial element here, feel so cheap and so easy. There's a scene where a girl walks into a basement, and somehow the room has transformed into this carnival-like setting. But because the movie is pretty cheap, there's only a couple of spectators, all with these creepy smiles on their faces. The girl gets trapped in a box, and then gets sliced in half. I did want to think this thing was creepy, but just felt artificial and fake. It's incredibly low budget in this moment, and you can tell, and I understand that part of the scene is supposed to be kind of a dreamlike sequence, but if you're gonna make a scene like this, you really need to lean into that hallucinogenic atmosphere. You really need to amp up the tension and the fear. You can't just dump this creepy concept on the screen and expect the audience to roll with it. There really isn't anything hinted from before about a carnival, or how this girl might have a fear of carnivals. If they'd even mentioned that, I think this would have had more of an impact, but as it is, it's just a really clearly low budget scene that comes out of nowhere where all of a sudden she gets trapped in this box and this crazy magician guy tries to saw her in half. A lot of the movie's horror scenes are all like this. People go into a dark hallway and all of a sudden get picked off by some ghostly spirit. Another thing that makes this not as scary is the spirits or creatures themselves just look like actors wearing masks. Yeah, they're supposed to be ghosts though. It just isn't something you can buy into because of the really low production value. If you're gonna make a film like this that's on a relatively low budget for a studio film, or hey, even your own movie, you need to lean into filmmaking techniques that will serve to benefit your movie. You might not be able to afford practical effects to make these scary tower monsters seem believable, so hint at what's in the dark, imply certain things without showing them. The fear of the unknown is scarier than the known. And if you can build up tension doing so and add an element of fear, it's a risk that will pay off. And you don't have to waste your budget or time, or the audience's time, making scenes where the characters aren't even scary and obviously artificial looking. Because if what you film looks bad, and if the story script can't save that, then what you're going to have is a product people are going to laugh at. The final issue with Taro is it simply is too undercooked for its own good. See, the movie deals with horoscopes, but doesn't really lean into that, or have a final act or solution that resolves the movie's core thesis. See, throughout the movie, these empty, backstory-less shells of characters keep dying because of the cards they have picked, which all deal with horoscopes. There's the Fool, the Hanged Man, the High Priestess, the Magician, the Fool, the Devil, the Hermit. Each death is kind of styled to represent this. The Hanged Man hangs someone on a bridge. The Fool picks off Ned from Spider-Man in an elevator after messing with him. But a key issue is there's no build-up to why this is happening. We understand the characters drew the cards, and now they're being picked off based on their horoscopes. Fair enough, but there isn't enough reason or dread to worry about what horoscope-based creature is coming next. And to be fair, the idea of a tarot card readings as a horror film hasn't been done before. It's kind of original, but the movie does nothing original with the premise. There's no scares that are unique, no memorable characters, no using these tarot cards in a way that, as I mentioned previously, will build dread. And that's because there's no sense of mystery. These characters keep dying, and at first, they're written off as an accident, fair enough, but it's how the film goes about these deaths that makes it so boring. There's no suspicion, no turning against each other. Even if it's for a minute, it's not enough. These characters and cards need to build up fear, make the characters not trust each other. One of the best things you can do in a horror film is make your main characters feel like they're going crazy, or close people to them, like friends and family, don't trust them, and think they're doing these horrible things, possibly on purpose. It adds tension and stress, and this relatability to the characters where you want them to prove everyone's wrong because this creepy supernatural thing actually is happening. Look at successful alternate horror films like Smile or The Babadook, which greatly use these elements. They build a fear and an anxiety in the main characters, which grounds the film in a kind of reality where you're worried about the main character. You think, is this person crazy or is this really happening? And it makes those films so much more interesting and worth discussing. But if you fail to do that and have these stuck up characters whose names I'm not even going to bother remembering and just don't have anything worth investing in, you're going to have a bad film, and even worse, one people will laugh at.